Hello and welcome to my show. Been at this for a very short period of time. I'm getting things together and I'm kind of enjoying doing this process because it kind of makes me think on my feet. Today we're going to have a little look at someone we haven't heard from for quite a while, Sleeping Warrior. He did grace MC Toon's 12-hour marathon recently in the comments. I'll come back to that, Anthony. Right now I want to have a look at something that Anthony did. He put up a video using Sabine as a source, saying that Sabine had said something, and this video is about 2 minutes long. I went and found the original. The original of this is actually, believe it or not, is fully available on YouTube, and it goes for like just under 16 minutes. So let's have a look at what Anthony did to this. And I've totally lost control of it, haven't I? There it is. Gotta scroll past this because it's probably copyrighted.
There's no force pushing down on you, that means you're currently accelerating upwards. If you hold something in your hand, that's not the gravitational force pushing it down, because gravity isn't a force. It's pushing on your hand because you are accelerating it upward. But wait, you may say, there's also the gravitational force pushing down, so the two forces balance to zero, right? No, because gravity is not a force. Gravity is a consequence of moving in a space-time that's been curved by the presence of masses. In this curved space-time around a planet, if there's no force acting on you, you fall towards the planet. That's not an acceleration. But if something gets in your way, like the surface of the planet, then that creates a force, so now you're accelerated. This is why there's no force pushing down on you right now. There's only a force pushing up.
Okay, yeah, this is basically an explanation using the Einstein equations. I can't noticing that there's some additional text has been put in there with slightly sarcastic comments. Yep, fair enough. It's when we look at the full video you'll actually understand why I make these comments.
The point where people usually go wrong is to conclude that because gravity is indistinguishable from acceleration, that means gravity accelerates you. But that isn't so, because to accelerate something you need a force, and gravity is not a force. The Newtonian picture is the one we learn at school, and it's useful so long as you are on Earth, but strictly speaking it's wrong.
Actually, this point would be contended by people such as PhD Tony and Professor Phil Bell, because they've used Newtonian physics to put things into orbit, whereas the description here is leave things on Earth. So yeah, we can do most of our work with Newtonian equations without much of an issue. It's only when you get the really fine stuff that Tony talked about, his two items, accelerate and decelerate, the two master-slave satellites that detect gravity, because one accelerates away from the other and then they catch up again. Those things do require extra calculations, they do require Einstein, they do require relativity. But most of the stuff we do, even putting an aircraft into flight, is still Newtonian. We don't need to get that deep into it. So I know Sabine's explaining this from the Einsteinian side, but I do think that statement's probably maybe a bit too broadly approached there.
Now, of course, physicists are no linguistic saints, and they'll sometimes refer to gravity as a force, even though it isn't. A typical example is when they speak of the four fundamental forces of nature. If they're being careful, they'll refer to it as the gravitational interaction and the four fundamental interactions. But often they don't. I think they really just call it a force because that starts with an F.
Okay, so at this point, calling people forward for utilising a term perhaps a bit loosely, but I kind of agree. It does get picked on a bit because it's becoming a point of contention through the semantics of language. Let's get past the music again.
Is gravity not a force? Because if you are... you fall.
So now we've got a comment back over the top of this. Anthony, I just sort of think that you've put a very personal poke at Craig on this one, but that's quite okay. I'll let Craig deal with you on that one. Let's move on a little bit further, and there's one more thing. No, that was it. That was it.
Stuck looking through dozens.
When you cut around 14 minutes of video out, you probably leave a lot of things out. So let's look at the next phase for this one here. I'd like to actually just look at Sabine's fuller component for a moment, and let's see what we can do with that.
This video is all about Albert Einstein. Yes, that guy again. Einstein is famous for his theory of general relativity. It's taught us that gravity is not a force. And that's probably the most misunderstood physics fact ever. Like, even physicists get it wrong all the time. Gravity is not a force.
So he hasn't edited a lot out at this point, but as you get deeper into this, there is a lot more detail. For example,
Theoretical
explains that this is an electronic device, and it gives you a reading of plus 10 meters per second squared, or approximately 1 g. She's talking about the fact that it's accelerating, it's detecting acceleration in an upward direction, and I'd really like to point out that is always going to be with respect to the direction of the gravity that is acting locally to that device. So whether you're in Australia, South America, Europe, Russia, doesn't matter. Up is relative to where you are, and more importantly, she does go on to talk about a thought experiment with a spring in a box, and that was also left out. And I think it's a pretty important thing to note that this device does read that way. Let's move on a bit to where she talks about. I think that the subject can get a bit confusing, but this is the primary thing. This is what Einstein's basically said.
So in this curved space-time around a planet, if there's no force acting on you, you fall towards the planet.
Now that is the pure mass attracting mass component that we talk about often, but she's kind of right. You would actually register in any accelerometer you use 0 Gs. And she goes on later to say 0 Gs is not exactly kosher either, so I guess that we're getting much more semantic about this. But this thought experiment about the rocket, you can measure the acceleration just by the spring alone, but you can never measure velocity, because once you reach a velocity, that spring is no longer subject to tension. That will change its shape in either direction. That's why velocity can't actually be measured. And it's really important people realise that. So she goes on to say, of course, that the velocity is relative. So if there's a velocity, it will be relative to, say, where they took off from, relative to the orbit of the Earth if you're going around it, relative to the rotation. But when it comes to acceleration, Einstein saw acceleration as an absolute because you can detect that.
We have a spring on a rocket in outer space. All right. What's this got to tell these situations apart? They're physically indistinguishable. That is, in a small box, the effect of gravity on the surface of a planet is indistinguishable from acceleration in the absence of gravity.
Yep, I fully agree. You can feel the acceleration, but you don't know what's causing it. But we're not here to debunk Sabine. We're very interested, however, in what was chopped out, and this is a piece that was chopped down, and it's a fairly large explanatory piece that really is needed for this to work properly. So leaving things out, I think, is probably a poor way to actually work this through. She's gone on to say about gravity. She talks about the 0 G plane, that velocity is relative, right? And even without going into relativity, I think Sabine does explain it fairly well. The use of the term gravity, the use of the term force, these are getting kind of mixed up a bit loosely, although most people do use the term force when describing gravity. Yeah, she's just saying under Einstein's theory it's not. So Anthony, nice try. You should put more detail in, and you should have a reference to where you got this from. Mind you, it wasn't hard for me to find. So Anthony, I said earlier I was going to come back to something, and this is what it is. MC Toon and I are looking forward to getting your response about PhD Tony. Hear from you soon, and the verdict is, you're going to love this, Anthony.